I want to know if you're ready for news like this. This year, 2026, we're going to mark, in September, we're going to mark 20 years since the retirement of that bird of prey right there. The retirement of the Grumman F-14 Tomcat from the United States Navy inventory. It was in September 2006 that this plane practically ceased to exist, because right after it was retired, the vast majority of the hundreds of units that existed were destroyed, okay? But now, in 2026, we're seeing a really big possibility of seeing an F-14 again, one of the most iconic fighter aircraft of the second half of the 20th century, back in the air. And I'm going to explain exactly how this could happen, okay? Check it out. The F-14 is a variable geometry aircraft, right? In other words, it can fly with its wings extended or with its wings swept back, depending on the flight profile you want to set for the aircraft. And in 2006, these aircraft were retired to prevent Iran, which is the only nation operating the F-14 outside the United States, from getting more spare parts for their already old Tomcats bought by Shah Reza Pahlavi in the 1970s. Iran managed to keep these aircraft flying through various improvised fixes. But the black market is something you can't really contain, and spare parts from Navy stocks would end up, on one occasion or another, making their way to the Persian Gulf. The Navy, which saw that the F-14 was expensive to operate, recognized that it had excellent flight characteristics. However, it had a slightly more modern and cheaper aircraft to operate, which was the F-18. So, in 2006, they decided to retire the F-14S, and not just retire them. Destroy everything, to prevent Iran from getting spare parts. So here we are in 2026, man, with this news right here. My God, the F-14 Tomcat could actually fly again in the United States. The so-called Maverick Law, or Maverick Act, which is named after the character Pete Maverick, played by Tom Cruise in the Top Gun movies, passed unanimously in the U.S. Senate. It passed unanimously in the U.S. Senate. In fact, while it was still just a proposal, this Maverick Law was sponsored by representatives and senators from both the Republican and Democratic parties. Mark Kelly, who is a former NASA astronaut and now a senator in the United States, is a Democrat, and he supported it. He was one of the first supporters of this bill, which is from a Republican senator. So it's been approved in the Senate, and in the House of Representatives, there's also a similar bill with the same name even, which will go to a vote in the coming weeks and should be approved as well. It should also be approved unanimously. I'm not sure it'll be unanimous, but it will be approved. Why? Because this represents a revival of the peak of American military power. This plane was unbeatable at the time. Have you seen our video about the F-14 Tomcat, which is one of the most viewed on the channel? It tells the whole story of the plane in that video, so you can check it out. Check it out after you finish this one. The F-14, it was destroyed, like I told you. But look at this. Look at this image here. This is a military aircraft graveyard where Americans usually store aircraft airframes that they might need somehow in the future, in the short or medium term, to put back into operation. That's what's happening now with some Boeing E-3 Sentry aircraft. Do you remember the Sentry? I've also talked about it in a previous video here, where one of them was destroyed by Iran in the Persian Gulf. And they still have about 30 fuselages of the E-3 Sentry in reserve, and they're going to take those fuselages and put them back into operation. What's happening here is the same thing. Look, in this graveyard here in the American West, there are 6 remaining F-14 airframes. 6 remaining airframes. There are, if I remember correctly, 2 F-14A, 2 F-14B, and 2 F-14D. In this photo here, you can see 4 of them. Look, 2 and 2. 4 of them. Down here we can see a bunch of A-10S, and up here a bunch of F-15S. Some helicopters here, and the central fuselage of an F-15 as well. But the crown jewels are right here, aren't they? These last 6 remaining F-14 Tomcats. And why are we talking about this now, man? Why is this coming up now? A lot of people are saying it's been 20 years, right? Celebrating 20 years since retirement. Let's give these planes a chance. But in my opinion, what made this possible was this right here. Look. What made this legislation possible was this right here. Look. A satellite image captured on March 9, 2026 showing F-14 fighter jets from the Islamic Republic of Iran Air Force and other aircraft being targeted at the 8th Tactical Air Base in Isfahan. Okay? So here's the thing.
Iran.
There was apostasy, right? About 10 operational F-14S at the beginning of this war. Now there aren't any left. Because those Israeli airstrikes obliterated all the F-14S they had. Let's suppose there are 1 or 2 left out of the original 8. Let's suppose. I don't know. It's too little to pose any kind of threat. And even for Iran, keeping 1 or 2 planes in the fleet is going to be ridiculously expensive. It's going to be ridiculously complex. So it's quite possible that even if 1 or 2 are left, the F-14, its story in the Iranian Air Force is over. And because of that, it might get a vote of confidence in the United States. It might return to service and it might fly again. I didn't say return to service, I said return to flying. Why? Now let's explain what this Maverick law means. This law? Maverick says that 3 of those Tomcats stored in Arizona at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, which are serial numbers 164,341, 164,602, and 159,437.
Sete.
Will be placed under the control of a museum. Which museum is that? That museum is the U.S. Space and Rocket Center in Huntsville, Alabama. For those who haven't made the connection yet, Huntsville, Alabama, is where Wernher von Braun worked after the war with his team of German engineers. And it was there in Huntsville that he developed the first rockets and missiles for the United States Army in the 1950s. And today there's this big museum there, the U.S. Space and Rocket Center. But it's written in the legislation that these planes will be placed under the full responsibility of the museum so that they can go on static display. And one of them, as the legislation says, one of them can be returned to flying condition. One of them. Well, now translating this legislation for you, which seems to be very strict, very restrictive actually, the result is it's just 1. Check this out. Everything in this military history preservation field operates on medium and long-term time frames. Getting a plane like this in the air today, under current law, considering it was largely destroyed due to sanctions against Iran, it wouldn't be overnight that they'd say everything's fine, everything's cleared, Let's fly all the Tomcats. No, but this is the start of a small legal framework that will indeed allow these planes to return to the air. Why do I tell you this? Because today they already have authorization as soon as it's voted on in the chamber to put one in the air. But after some time, that one that's in the air with several partnerships, which in the United States is totally possible and even extremely feasible. The partnership of private funders, companies, and enthusiastic individuals working together to finance putting an aircraft like this back in the air is quite possible. And this plane here, it basically represents the United States, right? This plane best represents the U.S. after the war. Can you recall another? No, right? It's the F-14 after World War II. You could say that in World War II there was the P-51 Mustang. But think with me here. Which post-war plane represents the United States the most? Is it the F-16? Is it the F-15? Is it the F-16? Is it the Phantom? Is it the F-18? Is it the F-22, the F-35, or is it the F-14? You agree there's no other, right? It's the F-14. So a lot of people with money are going to want to invest in this restoration here. You can count on that. Do you know who's going to start this, by the way? Look who it is. This right here, look, is happening right now. Restoration of a Panavia Tornado F2 to flying condition. For those who don't remember, the Panavia Tornado is a European aircraft with variable geometry as well. Who's restoring it? Jared Isaacman, a billionaire from the technology industry, who is currently the administrator of NASA. The guy single-handedly paid for 2 space trips in recent years with SpaceX. He funded the trips out of his own pocket because he wanted to go to space. In fact, he's the first, if I'm not mistaken, the first privately funded astronaut to leave the spacecraft and put his body outside in space, right? To fly in space like Leonov and Dwight did back in the 60s. Well, the guy is here restoring a tornado. He has the money for it, he has the drive for it, and he has every intention. He seems to have already said he plans to get involved in that project.
Do F-14.
Guys, we'll probably see the F-14 back in the skies, in air displays, at air shows, at the Oshkosh Air Show for sure. So for me, this is excellent news, right? This is excellent news for me. I think this plane deserves it. This plane, unfortunately, it had a traumatic end, right? After decades in service and being portrayed in movies in a way that marked everyone's youth, right? And there it is. And look how cool this is. This is a retired F-14 positioned for static display at the Jacksonville Naval Air Station in Florida. Look at what's written here. USS Nimitz, the American aircraft carrier that's currently over there in Guanabara, right? Over in Rio de Janeiro. So this here is an F-14 that operated on the aircraft carrier that's currently in Brazil. It was prepared here for static display in Jacksonville. Just to put your mind at ease, I did the math here. In fact, I just did the math before starting this video. Those 6 F-14S that are over there in Arizona, right? In the airplane graveyard in Arizona, they seem to be the last 6 in the Navy's inventory, right? Even though they're out there in the desert, okay? And
Porém, cara,
those aren't the last Tomcats, no. I counted no less than 83 Tomcats spread across the United States on static display in museums. Let me repeat that for you. 83. That's not a small number of planes either, okay? So, in a few years, when this Tomcat is flying, or when all 3 Tomcats are flying, And this legislation is followed by another one that will pass much faster. To get those last 3 that are out there in the desert, restore them to flight and create a Tomcat flight team. It's quite possible that some of those others that are under the responsibility of museums might end up being transferred to associations. And then from those associations to individual owners who will want to put those planes back in the air. I don't doubt any of that. It's a very expensive plane to maintain. It's an extremely complex plane. In terms of maintenance, it requires a lot of maintenance. However, if you follow this aircraft restoration market in the United States, there's nothing like it anywhere else in the world. These guys are really into it, and they have a lot of money to do it. So, if you agree with me, comment below and tell me what you think. If you disagree, do the same thing too.